Uh, Maybe just to kill some time in the meantime. By the way, we will have another in-person event in April 11th. Kind of like similar to the other proof events we had last semester in the fall. So we will send you kind of like an email with some more information about that. And just to see if someone is interested in attending. Oh, Sheila just also got here. Like I was telling them, I'll also make you a co-host, Sheila. But I was just telling them that we will send them soon, like an email with the information for like the spring April 11 event. And without well any more of now we are very happy to have Matt Charnley telling us about his experience like preparing graduate students into becoming like TAs at Rutgers. As you know, Matt is leaving us this semester, so we thought it would be a very nice moment for just for him to kind of like give kind of like this institutional knowledge that he has accumulated over the years, and hopefully that will be useful for whoever ends up teaching the course in the future. And Matt, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for welcoming me here, and thanks for inviting me to come talk about this here today. So let me get my slides up here. Hopefully that is now visible. Are we good? Cool. Um, I need to tuck this away somewhere. Okay. So, yeah. So again, hi, it's me. I'm here to then talk about sort of everything that's going on with TA training, what's happened over the years, where it is, how it's developing, all that kind of stuff, and things that I've learned from working with these new TAs over the last couple of years. Um, so as we go through this, if you have, questions, comments to jump in with, jump in as we go. Um, I don't know if I have an hour's worth of talk about here, but we'll get through what we have and sort of get to the end and we sort of have lessons learned. We'll see how that sort of pans out. Um, so let me just minimize that. Click here. Click here. Good. Okay. So, general plan. So we go through a brief introduction of sort of me, my context, and how I've gotten to this point. And then we'll get into the TA training seminar and sort of go through the main components of the seminar, what main things we do in the semester, and sort of what their goal is. And then at the end, we'll hit three main sort of topics, which I think we'll spend most of our time on. Important things for new instructors, so things that, I have learned are important that we talk about with these new instructors. Things that I've gotten back from the TAs, about their experience being a TA and what that feels like and what we can learn from that, as well as sort of ways I think or hope this program will develop in the future as it sort of carries on. Again, beyond me, but as it carries on for the future years. So, for me, I mean, I see most of you probably know most of this already, but there's probably context here that a lot of you don't have on this. So I'm in my seventh year right now here teaching full time. I got my PhD also from Rutgers in May of 2019. Um, this work was on like PDEs type stuff. And I've shifted more into the educational space from there. I guess the important context is that because I was did my PhD here, I went through this same TA training program back in spring of 2014. Um, so I was a first year grad student at that time. I went through the program just like all the other grad students are. And so I have sort of the context of I went through this program, I was a TA for several years, and then graduated, and then have come back to now run the program that I was sort of involved with all that many years ago. Um, and so I started running this in the spring of 2021. So thankfully, I was not running it spring 2020 when we had to pivot online. But spring 2021 was a fully online version of TA training. We then came back to in-person variants starting in spring 2022. All right. So what is this seminar? So the main sort of target audience for this is all first year PhD graduate students. We have some others filter in every now and again, mostly the master's students who will take it on occasion. But generally, it is intended for all first year PhD students to be in. this seminar during their first year. This is true even if they aren't planning to TA in the near future. We generally still want them to take the course during their first year. So, if they're on like NSF or something where they're not going to be teaching for the first 3 or 4 years of their career, we likely still want them taking this in the first year so that when they do get that opportunity, they're ready to go and don't have to sort of make up for it at that point later on in their career. Um, all of the first year students, at least as of this current moment, um, are either graders or on fellowship for that first year, which means they are not directly in front of students. So the point is that this seminar happens before they're ever in front of actual students. And so they can learn what they need to know from the seminar before they're teaching a class, before they're a TA for somebody else, before they're interacting directly with students in a classroom environment. The seminar meets once per week for 80 minutes for the entire semester. So I get 14 meetings with them, 14-hour and 20-minute sessions with them over the length of the semester to sort of get them ready to walk into a classroom the following fall when they're going to be a TA for the first time. I think the main point to get across here, and which sort of it pains me to say this sometimes, is that the goal in this seminar is the floor. Right. The goal is that we want to make sure that everyone who is entering to be a TA in that second year fall semester is able to do it satisfactorily. Right. I would love to teach them all about advanced pedagogy, active learning, and all this fun stuff and have them do all these fun activities. But the goal here is the minimum. It is this person will do a good enough job when they walk into their classroom in the fall. They know what's expected of them, they know what they have to do, and they're able to carry out those responsibilities. So I do, push beyond this on occasion. I do have a day in active learning where I try to sort of get thinking about more advanced things and see how the interaction goes. But the real goal is to make sure that everyone can, do a good enough job in their classrooms when they get into teach. And so, in order to pass this TA training course, basically the grades are satisfactory or unsatisfactory. They basically just have to be there. They have to show up, they have to come to class, they have to engage in the activities, meet with me when it's required, that kind of thing to pass the course. There's no like a final practicum or something that they have to actually do well on, which could be an interesting thought, but I have not gotten to that point yet. They just have to, come to class, be engaged, and, take part in all the activities of the course that it requires. All right, so I will leave this up here for a second. This is, or at least was at the start of the semester, the schedule that I had planned for this semester's TA training seminar. Um, the sessions are all the same. I've moved some around a little bit based on, who could show up when, what was happening with these different topics. Um, but this is sort of the basic layout and the things that get dealt with in the semester. Um, one that I will point out here, just as sort of a thing that I'm not going to mention much about later. This thing that is scheduled for April 8th is the Workplace Sensitivity Training Day. That happened on March 4th or 11th this time around. It bumped it up to the 11th. Um, that is a presentation from OEE, the Office of Employment Equity, about like, Title IX harassment, discrimination, that sort of stuff in the workplace. So they give our TAs a presentation about that kind of stuff once a year. And so all the TAs do have some experience with that, which is hopefully to mitigate other issues. But the rest of these we'll kind of discuss over the course of today, I think. Any questions or things that jump out at you at this point from what we're doing so far with this?
The ones that you're calling video recordings, is it kind of like how would they record something, or they're watching like a video recording, or
Okay, yeah. So the video recordings, I'll get into more detail in a little bit. Those are actually, I record them presenting a problem at the chalkboard, and
no?
then we
Okay.
discuss it afterwards. Yeah. That's one of the big things that has like the video recordings, the panels, so the discussion presentation and the panel on the last day. Those are ones that have stuck around since I took TA training back in 2014. Those, while they've changed their shape a little bit, they've mostly been similar to their than before. Yeah. The first day is basically what is the Rutgers math department like? Like, what are the course numbers? What's the schedule look like? What course do students take? Who's in each course? That kind of thing. How do you read the department website for, determining when you teach? Those sorts of things are what's day one, and then we sort of get into more different stuff from there. Okay. So. So in terms of like things that I consider the major components of the seminar, there's recordings, there's the observation which happens sort of off the normal schedule. There's the two panel sessions, there's a day of case studies, and then there's a bunch of different activities I think get at certain points or certain aspects of being a TA where it's good that they have this sort of experience before they, show up in the classroom. So the big one that everyone freaks out about when they hear that it's happening, and everyone sort of panics a little bit until they get through the first one, is the recordings. So twice throughout the semester, students are recorded presenting a problem at the chalkboard. Um, I know that sort of in some contexts, really isn't the ideal thing to be having them do because most of our recitations aren't really present problems at the board anymore. Um, but I haven't really figured out a good way to like set up any kind of group work to be recorded in a way that isn't fake or um, doesn't feel like it's any sort of genuine about what it should be. Um, that is a thought for the future. Because I know we're going more active learning stuff in general in recitations, and having them have more experience with that is probably better. But as of now, we are still on they get recorded presenting a problem on the chalkboard. Um, the goal is basically to get them to A, be at the board and present things, and get experience and feedback on how they explain their way through a problem on the various topics. So the first one that we do early in the semester is on applied optimization. So standard difficult problem in Calc 1, for the students at least. And then later they do one on trig sub. The main reason for that choice is because it is a sort of slightly more involved topic where how you fit the problem on the chalkboard is an important thing to consider while you're trying to do a trick sub problem. Because these problems are long, they have a lot of steps, there's a lot of sort of moving parts going on, and how you lay out the board is important. As well as if you haven't done Calc 2 in a while, you might need to review trig sub, and getting them to go back and review something before class is also a relevant skill for them to learn. Um, After this happens, I post the recordings to them through Canvas using the Kaltura Media space, and they can then watch it on their own time. And I meet with every single one of these first year grad students one-on-one for like 10, 15 minutes or so to discuss the recording, how it went, what they think went well, what they should improve for the future, that kind of thing. This happens both after the first recording and after the second one, where we sit down and talk about like, okay, did you improve? What got better? What you should focus on as you go into teach a class, that sort of thing. Um, so common things we see a lot, and this is sort of probably what to expect to see from people who are new to teaching, um, is standing in front of the board as in, they write something and then they just stay put and they're blocking the entirety of what they wrote on the board. Not turning out to face the students, right? They have to you to look at the students, make sure they're engaged, make sure you're following them. And so that turning around is a skill that you really don't think about like those first two, really, you don't think about until you get recorded doing something. You realize, oh, wait, I was blocking the board the entire time. And a lot of them come to me in the first meeting, go like, yeah, I couldn't see the board at all because I was standing in front of it. And that's how it normally goes, but it takes getting recorded that one time to see how you present things, how you talk about stuff, to be able to, understand this is a problem you have to deal with. And then just not writing big enough. mainly for optimization because oftentimes there's a picture and there's a picture that you want to label. And so you have axes and you have labels and you have then, subscripts on those labels. And by the time you get that far in, if your picture is not huge, the writing's too small. Um, and I was pointing out because we're in Hill 525 for this, which is a very shallow classroom. It's only like 4 chairs deep. But there are some rooms like in back where the room is super narrow and long, and you have to be extra careful there about your handwriting size because the back is further away. Um, so those are some of the most common things that always come up. Like pretty much my first meeting boils down to those three things plus other issues that, I have seen throughout the recording session. Yeah, this is probably one of the biggest parts of the seminar. Any questions or comments on this site on the recordings?
Oh, I'm not with you. Can I add something?
Yeah.
I found out that most people, including lecturers, don't open the lights as they should in the classroom, and it's very difficult to see the board actually.
Oh, the lights? Yeah.
Yes, I see it very, very often. Yeah.
Yeah, so that I should probably mention at some point because the room we're in is well lit and doesn't have like the blackboard lights, so I don't have to worry about them like not turning that on. But it's a good thing to make sure I mention. Yeah.
Well, since we're adding stuff,
Okay.
I got a good piece of advice from Stephen Greenfield when I was a grad student back in like 2003 or 4, which was to sit in every corner of the room when it's empty before you first teach, so you can actually see. And it was really cool advice. Really helped.
Yeah, yeah. One of the big things that I try to at least if I don't like say it directly, like usually I'll make this point at some point during the semester, is that figure out what the podium blocks in the classroom, right? Because the podium's going to block some part of the board for some students. And so, wander around the room, get to each corner, see what the podium is in the way of, see where you should and shouldn't be writing. These are all like, important things to keep in mind for sure.
Now, like many, like these days, people will use a projector
hmm
to either lecture or like solve problems. So, did you consider kind of like updating their presentations? As in, like, if someone wanted to use a projector to do the presentation, would that be okay, or do you still think something about requesting it through a chalkboard should be prioritized? Because like it may not be end up being what they end up using. Like these days. So.
Yeah, I go back and forth on this. I mean, so I feel like if someone really wanted to use a tablet, I probably would be okay with that. But I think there's also a skill to be developed in sort of the on the fly open format writing, right? Where you have like, you walk to a student group and you're writing on a piece of paper in front of them, right? I feel like that's more chalkboard than tablet. I don't know. I could see it going either way.
I wouldn't recommend a TA to use tablets because they're just helping. They're not, it's not like a class notes or something. And also the students then will require to get everything that is written there because it's downloaded. Oops, sorry. And at some point you are losing students. And then it's very also difficult to tell them, oh, I'm not going to upload.
Yeah, I can see that argument both ways. Yeah, for sure. That's always a hard part. Yeah.
I think you're giving such a valuable lesson in the awareness of like physical space, though, that even if you never
Yeah, I
use a
feel
chalkboard again, what you say the recording is just shoving it in their face. Hey, your body's in the way. Like, whoa, now I'm looking at how the room looks in a totally different point of view. I think Mario,
yeah.
that point of view shift is so cool or so
Yeah, I think that
useful,
is a big thing
even
to
if they
get
don't use
across.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do like being able to have that point of like, hey, watch, you need to be careful where you're standing, how you're looking. Like all that matters. It comes a lot more direct when you have to write at the board, turn around, look out, and bounce back and forth between that. Okay. So Outside of the recordings, the other big thing that we have them do is we have them go observe current recitations happening that semester. Um, so I put together a list of all the grad students that are currently a TA for something. And then the current first year grad students get to sign up for where they want to go to observe a class. Um, they go to two of these throughout the semester, one early on, right before we have a panel that debriefs recitations general, and then one near the end of the semester. So they're going to be starting to go to their second ones as of this coming Wednesday. Um, and so, we debrief with a panel of current TAs talking about how courses run. The real goal here is to get them to feel for what courses here at Rutgers look like. Get them in the classroom, get them seeing the environment, get them seeing, the balance of group work and presentation, and see how a certain TA is running the course. Like they're encouraged to take notes, talk with me, we debrief afterwards, we can discuss these sorts of things. But the goal is really to get them in a classroom, get them seeing how it works, and have them ready to jump into their own classroom come the fall semester. I generally try to have at least one of these be a workshop. I used to have them do one set that was all recitations and one that was all workshops, but because these formats have kind of merged over the years, um, I really want them to go to at least one where it's the sort of mandatory turned in group work of a workshop, where the other can be anything else. And like I make no condition on who they go observe. They can pick whoever they want that's currently TAing. Um, I have thought, I don't know if I should like change that or not, but that's the way I have it set up currently. All right. We also have two different panel sessions for them to hear from current grad students on how things are going, how things go. Um, so one happens right after they go to observe their first recitation, so they can debrief their experience of having been in that class and talk to people who are currently running recitations and how they feel about things. And the second one happens the last day of the semester as sort of a summary and capstone for the course, um, where they can ask basically all their pressing questions about what it means to be a TA and what that looks like in the classroom. I try to put at least one second year student on each panel just so they have someone who's also new at this on the panel, someone who can give more of the direct experience of being in it for the first time. And then I try to bring at least one older student as well who has more experience, who can talk more about, multiple semesters being a TA and multiple years of doing this experience. The second panel also often devolves into summer teaching, just because that's what people are asking questions about. Which also I want to have someone older on there so they can actually answer those kinds of questions. I think this ends up being one of the better days of the course. The students get a lot out of being able to talk in a sort of organized way to current grad students to see, how it is being a TA, what to think about, what to organize for, what to plan for, that kind of thing. All right, then we have the case studies day. So this is also always a fun day. Um, so from the CBMS, there is this book about case studies for today's classroom. I mean, today is like 2001 or 10 or something. I don't know. It's not a new book. Um, but it still has some relatively, reasonable things to think about in terms of things that might occur while you're in a classroom or being a TA and how you might respond or how someone might respond or get them thinking about, what's going to happen in the situation. So this is our second to last day of the semester, so it'll be in a couple weeks now. Um, Basically, I get them all a case study to read before class in small groups. They come and they discuss them, and then we sort of share out what it looks like. So for a summary of this, you can get the sort of things we're thinking about here. Seeking points is a student who comes to office hours asking about their exam because the problem said to use the definition of derivative where they just did the formula, the shortcut formula, and they want points back for doing that. Emily's test is about basically proctoring and seeing someone who might be cheating on the exam with proctoring. Changing sections is about communication with other TAs and the head instructor around students switching sections and how to communicate with students who aren't doing well in the course. And then pairing is about group work and trying to facilitate group work or think, pair, share sort of thing in class and the reactions to how that might go. Yeah, Sheila.
Matt, I might have missed it. You are using a book, like a pedagogy book to train the TAs, or are these that you constructed it based on like case studies from the book? Would you share the title of the book?
Yeah, the book is right here on the slide. This is the cover of the
Oh,
book that I used right
oh my
here.
goodness. Okay, I see. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So yeah, the book is just for this day. The rest of it is all just based on like what was covered in TA training in the past, mixed with what I think is useful as of now, and then pulling from various sources to sort of pull it together. But yeah, so this often leads to some fun discussions about like how to deal with various situations in the classroom, um, dealing with group work dynamics and group and that kind of thing. I also tend to, and I'll get to more of these later, share some cases with them that were written by people in the math teaching group at Rutgers, the grad students, to represent sort of scenarios that they had dealt with as TAs, to sort of get the current first years thinking about, what might you do in this kind of scenario? And I'll mention some of those with them later on. I also can pull it up later. I don't have them in this document, but I can pull them up if we want to talk about those sorts of things um, later on. Okay, and then from there, now we just have a bunch of different activities for the different weeks that go into, various aspects of being a TA. So the first of these, which I now use two of, and I've used some other ones before, is video case studies. So this is the sort of other version of the recording that Mariana was thinking about, which is looking at some online video case studies that go through, um, certain aspects of being a TA and what that might look like and what to, set up and do. So these are all from the so I mentioned the video case studies for college mathematics instruction. It was an NSF funded project a while ago, um, but they have the case studies. There's about 10 of them that are on there, um, along with a guide for participants, a guide for facilitators, and sort of what they sort of go into as a case study. So the two that I use right now are facilitating group work, which sort of looks at the different ways of communication with instructors with their students in a group work context. So that one has them listen to the conversation that's going on without the video, and then they watch the video without sound, and then they see them together. And so they're sort of piecing together both the audio and the visual sort of language that's going on and the communication that's happening in this context, and sort of unpacking how all these parts come together to make a successful teaching experience. So they're dealing with both the visual and the audio side of communication. Inside the group has you listen to a specific group's discussion of solving a certain problem, um, and trying to see what you can get out of what they do or don't understand based on what they say. Um, that one goes a lot into an overload use of the word it and like, how we often use pronouns to refer to things in when we're trying to describe stuff, and that it might not be clear to everyone what we are saying when we try to say it. Um, you heard directly from a student when they say, "Oh, x squared is 2x." Well, okay, we know what the student is trying to say, but if you take it at face value, that's just bad English, and it's not a full sentence. It's not a valid sort of true sentence. Um, but things like that, and trying to sort of emphasize to students, the first years who are watching this with me, that like you have to be careful how you say things and the way you say it to make sure that you are conveying the right message to your students. There's also a case study here on the first day of class, which I think is a nice one, where it's just about like, how do you set the scene on day one to get off on the right foot with your students? I haven't used that one the last couple of years. I used it a couple of years ago, but haven't come back to it in a while, just for time basically in the semester. I can only have 14 days with them, so I got to figure out the right way to use the different days. Okay. Next thing is different activities throughout the semester. So, workshop grading. I have them take a workshop problem, which if any of you have taught Calc 1 recently, you probably know this problem because I always like giving this one in class. I really like this Calc 1 um, problem for derivatives and stuff. And then have them look at some of my old student answers to it and try to put some sort of grade on it. Um, I give them a vague rubric of like, generally, 5 points is correct, and they can sort of piece it out from there. Um, but this is always a good experience for them to sit down and like be like, okay, how do I grade this? And yes, they're normally grading already this month because they're grading for some other courses. But having them, discuss it with their peers is a good exercise for them to be able to do at this point. Also, them getting to see what freshman Calc 1 work looks like is also sometimes eye-opening for them, in terms of how, organized or not the work is. Another workshop-based one, this one was what we did a little bit last week, or a couple weeks ago, is sticking points, right? Again, one of my favorite Calc 1 problems to give in workshops, this ellipse problem. And so basically their goal here is to figure out, okay, work through the problem, look at it. Where do you think students will get stuck? And what are you going to say in order to help them work through that sort of sticking point? So for a lot of them here, it's part B, where it's find the points on the ellipse, where they forget that it also has to be on the ellipse, and then they don't plug into the equation there. Then you get to part C, where it's okay, how do I talk about vertical versus horizontal? And then they're okay with parts D and E. But like things like that will all come into discussion. We're like, okay, how would you approach a group? How would you notice that they're struggling on this topic? And then how would you, help them through it? And then we have lecture prep. So this is one of the newest days I've added, mainly because we saw some issues with these students going to teach summer classes and not knowing how to prepare for a class day. So basically, this is what replaced the first day of class presentation day. Um, and it's basically on thinking about and thinking through how you prepare an 80-minute lecture on extreme values. Um, I choose extreme values because it has a topic that has a lot of sort of fun, good entry points. A lot of ways to sort of get into this topic in an interesting way. And so I sort of give them the OpenStax textbook section on extreme values. And I tell them to basically between the two classes that we have every Wednesday, prep a set of lecture notes for yourself for this class. Basically, the note should be whatever you would want to bring to class to give your lecture, um, including examples or details, whatever you want to include on that. And then they turn that into on Canvas before the class next week. I give it some comments. And then in class, we sit down and they, in groups, sort of go through what they planned and sort of share out and figure out any commonalities, any differences, and so they can then hopefully learn from their peers about, how they prep their notes and what they might want to do in the future. Again, like I say here, there's no wrong answers besides not doing it. There's no wrong way to prep a lecture at this point, but the goal is that you then do the experience, and then when you meet with your peers, you learn what they did, and you sort of borrow and mix and match and get to what you like in terms of lecture preparation. That's probably my last one. Yes. So, any questions or thoughts on these different activities and stuff?
Matt, I have a question. I know MAA has workshops about like training the faculty who is training the graduate students. And I know that you were a fellow, right? Like, did you attend any of the MAA or any other organizations like workshops on how to like train the graduate students?
Yeah, I've gone to a couple of, I think, well, maybe one. I think I applied for a second one, and then because I was applying to it again, they wanted to take new people. But that's where I got these case studies from, where I found out about these video case studies were from
Oh,
the Co-Minds Group's workshop.
yeah,
I want to say I went in summer of 21, I
yeah.
think. So I had just done it for the first time and was like, okay, I want to make some changes. And so I went to the workshop over that summer. I found these case studies because I didn't use any the first time I taught it. I found these case studies. I found a lot of other resources out there, and I sort of, revamped a lot of it from the information from that discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on those activities? All right,
Yes.
cool. So yeah, go
Uh,
ahead.
Matt, okay. I have to run to teach my 350 class pretty soon. Just
Okay.
wanted to ask you, like, I remember, like, in one of the earlier sessions, there was some discussion about how to sort of, for them, for the TAs, to keep a certain relation with the students in the sense that the TAs, they were talking about in some situations, the students would not necessarily follow their instructions if they became very sort of informally friendly with the students early on. And so so that kind of how is that like done in the training to help them to adjust and learn to, on the one hand, they need to be accessible to the students, to be friendly. On the other hand, they also need to s- have some kind of authority in the sense that students would follow their instructions and would not go out of bound.
Yeah, great question. So I don't think I have any sort of actual formal component that deals with that. I think it mostly just sort of comes up in various sort of areas in the discussion kind of infrequently. Um, right. So when we have the OE, the harassment one, where they talk about, don't get in front of the students, don't do anything dumb. Um, but generally it comes down a lot to just trying to kind of embody that same thing in the way that I run the class.
Uh-huh.
Even though, yeah, so the age gap is different, but like having this discussion of like, okay, how do you like run this kind of workshop? Because they're closer in age, the students will tend to be more friendly towards the TA than they would towards like an instructor. Um,
Right. Right.
and so it can be a different scenario to try to sort of both keep that rapport and build that rapport but keep it professional. And I think a lot of what I try to emphasize is just this idea of like this is your job, it's a professional relationship, and that is what it is. Um, but I think I could probably do more with having something in there to sort of make that more clear.
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm not sure how I would do that because a lot of the time I think it just sometimes comes natural, sometimes it doesn't. I think figuring out a way to explain it to someone who it doesn't come natural to is tricky.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the last one we can sort of discuss more as we go through these different slides. I have just one slide of each of these things. So things that I have learned from both working with these TAs and from them talking about their various experiences being a TA, that we can sort of discuss and see where we want to go with this from here. So, important things for new instructors. I mentioned the first two of these earlier, and also Paul about the idea of physical space in the room, right? How do you position yourself in the room? How do you like? I guess that can also fit with sort of the Gentile's question about, authority in the room. Like, how do you position yourself both physically and sort of authoritatively in the room, so that you have that kind of authority, that respect from the students, but you're not sort of that superimposing, you don't want to be threatening that or be superimposed. That's not the way a TA runs a recitation. Um, but having the right sort of status in order to make things work out well. Looking out at the class while you are presenting at the chalkboard, that's a big one that comes up fairly frequently. Um, and then the last two show up as we go throughout the semester. So, how much to prepare for class? So this comes up a lot in the panels as well as in the lecture prep day, where, and the recordings as well, where these students who are the first years have to go in and sort of prepare for a class day. They have to prepare for, presenting problems on the board, where basically for these recordings, they get given a set of like 15-ish problems. And when they get there or when they go to the board, I will tell them which one I want them to present. So it's sort of meant to mimic the student being like, hey, can you solve problem 10 for me? It's meant to sort of fit that sort of rhythm where they don't know which one they're going to present until they're at the board. Um, so the first year is getting used to, how long it takes to prepare this kind of thing. How much detail do you want when you prepare this kind of thing? They're sort of fighting with that on their own over the course of the semester, so they know how much they need to prepare and how much time goes into getting ready for a class like the first time you're teaching it. Um, and then we address that more directly in the lecture prep day, where they don't have to, they've spent a time preparing a lecture and they know how long that takes now, and they can then discuss, oh, I could have gotten away without doing this, or I can shorten this to this way, or I needed more information than I gave. They figure that out when they're talking with their peers on the lecture prep day. And then confidence is big. Um, you'll have some people that are overconfident when they walk in the classroom. They just feel like they know what they're doing, and then they struggle. And then so that is one side. The other side is the first years who have never like talked in front of people before, and so they're usually pretty shy, less confident in themselves. And then hopefully with the recording and seeing how they do, they can sort of build up that confidence to be doing better with this stuff by the time they actually get into classrooms um, the following year. There's obviously a lot more that comes up, but these are sort of the main highlights that I thought of for, the things that are important that get instilled in new instructors before they actually end up in the classroom. Any thoughts or additions that you think might be important for a list like this?
Hey, so this actually is, I guess, Zheng Hao left, but his question about like, that kind of distance thing, like,
Mm.
professional distance, right?
Yeah.
If you give me like 30 seconds, I have an anecdote that shows what not to do. Because I was a grad student at Rutgers too, taught a summer
Mhm.
course. My first summer course or second summer course was Math 252, and I never took differential equations in college. So I read the book for 252 and then taught it, right? And last day of class before the final, I asked the students, so like, how'd you guys like the course? Like, it was great, it was good. Everything makes sense. Good. I'm like, and then I admitted to them, I said, I never took this course. So it was last day, I thought it was safe, right? I wasn't
Hmm.
safe because what happened is a student complained to the undergrad vice chair.
Yeah.
And I mean, everyone was like, fine. And it was the one student who failed. I said, well, he's not qualified, you know? Everyone else, and the undergrad vice chair at the time looked at my exam, said, your exam's actually too easy. You know, it's clear the students, well, they failed, but you still shouldn't say stuff like that. And I didn't
Yeah.
know, I was your students, right? At the time. And
Hmm.
and it totally seemed safe. And then you never know.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Can I add some stuff?
Sure.
Okay, I have a lot of experience. I teach more than
Okay.
33 years at Rutgers, and I was a TA, and I saw all the courses the way they're going. So before I was at Rutgers, I was at other places, and I think that something should be added, and this is for international graduate students. When I
Mm-hmm.
came to this country, I was an international graduate student, and I was shocked because in most of the places on the planet, the level is very different. And I was expecting much more than I got from my students. And then I didn't realize that I actually have to show on the board stupid things like distribution rules and stuff like this. But also it was a cultural shock for me. Like in my country, if somebody is doing, worse or fail on the exam, you tell them, look, you have to improve, you didn't do well. And then I realized that in the United States, I get into troubles. I have to tell, oh, you're such a good person. But you have just a little bit to improve. You can make it. And this, the whole culture, how to approach the students was extremely difficult for me at the beginning. And all the time when I went to class, I say, Sarah, don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. I was like, really kind of like a dog. I was like, putting myself in this situation, okay, it's obedience class to a dog. That's what I did to myself. And I mean, now it's second nature, obviously, and I'm trying, and even sometimes now I'm a little bit harsh from the students. Like if I have half of the class not coming and then they're failing the exam, I scream on them, you know. Um, yes, and another thing that is also important, um, when I teach, one of the rules that I give to my TA, and I also give my TAs, if I have ones, lately I don't have many, I give them rules, and those are my rules. For example, they don't supposed to involve in any policy matter of my class. I will decide everything that has to do policy. This is changing grades, make-up exams, everything that you want, all those kind of things. A TA has to have some generic email. You have to contact your lecturer. I cannot deal with this because they are very tricky. Many times they were asking me something, I say no, and they go to the TA, and the TA, usually say yes, is more kind of the friend. So just those two things.
Can I ask about Sarah's first point about cultural differences, Matt? Like, do you address like the American context, or because if a lot of students didn't go to university in the United States, they might have totally different I mean, I've seen it with TAs, right? Very different expectations.
Yeah.
Of course.
So a little bit. So a lot of this ends up coming up in the one-on-one meetings after the recordings. So like a lot of for several of the international students who are coming in who, like Sarah said, don't expect to have to show these little dumb things on the board. I'll make that point during the one-on-one after the recording where like, hey, I know it's a difference from where you're coming from, but there will be students who will ask you this question. They will ask you about this part of the process. Not that I think you should have to do this because, but they will ask you. Just make sure you're ready for it when it happens. If someone asks you, what did you do here? That you know it's like, oh, they're asking about distribution or something. Right. So a lot of that in terms of the mathematical content, a lot of that comes up in the one-on-ones after the recordings. Um, in terms of just the like general cultural dynamic of the classroom, um, some of that gets asked here and there. And I think they pick it up from context, which maybe they don't. Maybe they should be done more explicitly. But most as of now, it's mostly done just via context and the way that they observe classes, they see how things are run, that kind of thing.
I wonder if you could have, former students of yours, that is to say, the current TAs, compile lists of things of like, if you're from here, you might be surprised by this or something. And then you could like hand it
It could
out,
be
and it's like
nice,
these aren't
yeah.
my words; these are what other TAs have experienced.
Yeah, that would not be bad. Have them fill out whatever they was surprising to them and stuff. Yeah, it could be good.
It also goes the other direction because you could have like American TAs who have international students, and they also may need like an adjustment, as in like the international students may address you in a different way from like the regular student, like American students and things like that. Uh, and like for example, I remember like there was like a year like where because of the Chinese New Year, like a student had gifted me like one of these like very like a cute thing like like for the celebration of Chinese New Year, which I'm sure is like a very common thing to give your professor something like in China. Whereas here, I do think you can be sometimes taken aback because you're not expected to receive gifts from students. You know what I mean? So I think it's also good to kind of like tell them, oh, by the way, don't read too much into that because it's just what they do. Like they come from a culture where maybe it is more common for you to kind of like, as a sign of respect, give a gift. Um,
I mean, I appreciate you sharing it, Mariana, but I think um, just like Sarah, I came to this country as a graduate student, and I do remember at the international office, we were given workshops on how to adapt to this new culture. And I think that is important. And as you mentioned, it goes both ways. Rutgers is not just a local college. We have students with different values, different traditions. I think we all need to be aware. And I think, to be honest with you, for the international TAs, because this is the topic for our talk, right? Having this type of training from someone like them will will receive differently when it is given by someone who have not been in their shoes. If you understand what I mean. Because we don't want to also sound like, oh, we live in this country, we know this better than you. To me, that's demeaning, and it would be received differently versus these are the social expectations or socially acceptable, culturally acceptable behavior in this setting. I think the way that we frame matters, but I think I really agree. Um, Last semester, it happened very recently when I went to observe my class. I had my graduate student as a TA, and there was an LA, learning assistant, and the dynamics in that class was, oh my goodness. I shared it with Peter, then Peter shared it with Yona because it wasn't a good fit. And I think when the LA is even assigned into the classes, some considerations should be given. In that case, I had a brand new graduate student. It was her first time being a TA. And there is another learning assistant. And it seems like that learning assistant, who is a white male, as if he took over the whole class, like Sarah was talking about, I'm the authority here. He took over the class, and I think for the student, I mean, my TA, it was culturally okay to be in a setting like that, and I had to really give her some advice. You are the one in charge here. You are not the learning assistant. You are the recitation instructor. This is your classroom. So those type of things, it affects the students, and a couple of students even mentioned it in their evaluations, actually, talking about the LA and how the LA is behaving in the class, overwriting the authority of the teaching assistant who just became a teaching assistant. So those dynamics really matter in a learning space or in any space.
You should have gone to the vice chair. I have been actually twice. I mean, I'm glad that only twice I had a problem with the TA, but twice I had amazingly serious problem with the TA. The TA just told me, "You're a woman. I'm not going to listen to you, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to do
Wow.
that, and I don't want to do
Wow.
that." So I went immediately. First, I was nice, and I record all the emails. And also, I had another TA that I came and I watched her. She did horrible job. I did a surprise. I don't like to tell them when I come. So when I come, I realize that this TA come to class late, have no idea what to
Hmm.
teach, start
Yeah.
asking everybody. Okay, but it's very sad that even though I made a big case out of it, this TA was hired again and again, which I
Hmm.
found the department really doing a bad job with that. Sometimes when they are behaving in such a thing that it's all total cultural war that they don't understand the hierarchy, that actually you are the lecturer, they supposed to help you, not the other way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, then it's a problem. And then you should go to the chairman and the vice chair. You're not supposed to solve it with yourself if it's very difficult. Sometimes you have no choice.
Yeah. No, you are right. Yeah.
Yeah, I made some notes so I can incorporate things later. Um, yeah. So we got a couple minutes last bit to wrap up. So things from TAs. So I know this is likely not potentially for people who are actually, attending at a seminar like this. Um, but things that have come up in the past in terms of issues from TAs, in terms of how they interact with this sort of role, um, is communication. There are some scenarios where, if a TA has a question about something on a quiz or an exam or something, or a quiz or recitation, they, ideally would hear back before that recitation happens, as long as they ask it a reasonable amount of time, um, which, have been issues sometimes. Appropriate expectations for graduate students, so like what they're supposed to do as a part of the class. Do they write quizzes? Do they write rubrics for the exams? Like where the expectation falls. And I think a lot of this really just comes down to this last point of the whiplash of dealing with different instructors with different styles in different semesters. Right, so they might get basically the fact that there's no real uniformity into how instructors deal with their TAs. So you may have one semester where, the instructors prepping the quiz, giving the TA a lot of flexibility in terms of how they run their recitation. And then they have another semester where that entirely flips, and basically they're being given every single guideline for every 5 minutes. You do this in your recitation, this is how it runs, and this is how you do things. And just not knowing what to expect semester to semester causes issues. Not that it's, something we have to directly fix because we all teach our own way and we all want to run these things our own way, but just being aware of the fact that our TA might be coming from their previous semester in a very different academic environment where they are expected to do different things or had different rules placed on themselves for what they were doing. Um, so, I mean, that has been the main things that I've seen come up from them is lack of communication and then just getting into a course and not knowing what to expect and where the rules are. I think those come together as well as an if you, as the instructor, can communicate very clearly what your rules and guidelines are, then you can sort of mitigate a lot of this whiplash because at least they will know what to expect coming into your class. Because again, you are on the same team here, right? The instructor and the TA together are the instructional team for the course. You're on the same side here. You just have to basically it comes down to adequate communication to making sure that both sides know what to expect of both other sides and when things are going to happen and how it's all going to play out so that there aren't these miscommunications later on in the course. All right, and then last steps for potentially where this is going in the future. Um, I think the big thing that I've seen is that we need to do a better job preparing them for group work. Um, because a lot of the recitation is turning into more group work and less of mini lectures or presenting problems at the board, they need to be better prepared for this group work component. I've been trying to figure out ways to do that. I tried a new activity this semester where I basically had them sort of mock TA for a group, for the group of the fellow first years. I think it went okay. Um, it was kind of short, so it was hard to see what was actually happening if they were interacting properly, but like at least it gets them thinking about it a little bit. And I'll probably want to keep that for the future or have that be kept in the future. I also think this course could do with a lot more involvement outside of the first semester, outside of the spring semester. The person in this role could theoretically, hopefully provide, an early observation to all new TAs in their first fall, before the instructor goes to see them. They could be involved in the assignment process for courses to make sure that, people who need or would do better in certain kind of assignments get those assignments. The people who, would do less well can get other ones. Um, I've also tried a couple times to have meetings in the first fall where they're TAing to sort of debrief and see how things are going. It's never really panned out into anything, but I feel like it could be useful, like, touch point early on in their teaching career to see how things are going, how things are working out, and what they can do to improve how they're doing their work as a TA. So we are just past 4, but that is basically what I have for this. So let me jump back to this one, which is probably the most interesting slide. Um, and then I can leave it there and take questions.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was great. I don't know, as he was saying, like if anyone wants to ask anything else, like any last minute questions.
Like, or if not, come find me at some point. I'm usually at coffee hour a couple of days a week, or come send me an email and we can chat about this at any later point as well.
I just had a quick question. So when you said that the for these classes you teach is either uh, they pass or they fail, right? Um,
Yes.
so that means that if they were to fail, they wouldn't be assigned anything until they pass a course, or how does like what is the material effect of they assuming that someone has failed? Maybe no one has ever failed. You know what I mean?
There has been one.
Okay.
Um, so it's very rare.
Mhm.
The what is supposed to happen, emphasis on supposed to, is that they don't get a TA assignment until they pass TA training the following year. Um, Theoretically, like I had wanted to get it into the graduate student like
Mhm.
process or bylaws, whatever, that you couldn't become a PhD candidate until you passed TA training. But that got vetoed down. Um, so basically, they could theoretically not pass until they're trying to graduate and then pass that last year, and they would still technically be okay by the rules. But in general, the rule is you wouldn't get a teaching assignment. You have to take it the following year. You have to pass it then.
Okay.
And then, but
Mhm.
theoretically, beyond that point, you then wouldn't get funding because your funding is tied to being a TA. So.
Mhm. Okay.
Uh, Matt, this is not related to TA, but you just mentioned funding related to being a TA. So these
Mhm.
students, they have RA funding also, like or the extent of the research uh, opportunities for them. Like, do you know any details about it?
A little bit. So generally, and this, coming back to when I was a grad student here, the contract you get, guaranteed when you sign it, when go to start grad school, gives you a guaranteed 5 years of funding,
Hmm.
with a designation for what those years will be. Generally, the first year is as a grader, and then the next 4 are all as a TA.
Oh,
And so
okay.
it is being a TA that gets you your funding, your tuition remission as a graduate student. Um, some advisors can fund graduate students, but that is not the sort of expectation of the program, right? If you're in a different discipline, like, biomedical engineering, for instance, you're generally working in a lab and it's your
Hmm,
advisor
yeah.
who pays for all of your stuff. But math, it's generally the TA work that pays for your
Hmm.
stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Any last question?
Is it something you wanna continue doing in your new position?
I mean, I'm gonna drop the screen share. I mean, if the opportunity arises, like this is not a thing that I would be opposed. Like this is something that I would not be opposed to continuing doing. Like I enjoy this work. I enjoy like training people on this kind of thing. I think it's really fun. And I think it's useful. I think it's helpful to give them this kind of experience. So, I mean, ideally, yes, but we shall see where that goes in the future.
Okay, I think that's a perfect place to end. And thanks, Matt, again. Obviously you will be well, I mean, you will still be in the department, but like since it's probably like the last talk you're giving to the department, you'll obviously be missed. And like thanks for like sharing your knowledge with us today. Yeah, we'll record it and it will be on YouTube. So like once we have the link on the video, we'll send it in case someone else wants to watch it again. Yeah, yeah.
All right, great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.